I wanted to get far enough away from my house that if the man followed me, I would be able to see it. So I continued walking. I made it about half a block before I stopped walking. I stood between two houses and waited, wondering what would happen next. After standing still for about 30 seconds, I started to think it might be a prank by one of my neighbors or something. I kept thinking it was probably nothing, but it was still a little scary. I knew my neighbors and none of them were known for playing crazy pranks. Still, I couldn't help but think it probably wasn't a big deal. It was just some random guy. He probably just needed to use my yard as a shortcut or something. I decided to continue walking down the street. As I walked, I paid attention to whether I heard anything else. I had taken about 20 steps away from my driveway when I heard a sound again. The sound seemed to come from the exact same place as before. The sound was really faint. It almost sounded like a person dragging themselves along the ground. Whatever was in my yard was clearly moving and making its way closer to my driveway. I stopped walking and listened. I waited about 10 seconds, but all I heard was the cricket noise and the occasional car driving down the main road about half a mile away. I figured whatever was in my yard must have moved away. I started to walk down the street again. When I started walking, I realized I was walking towards the park I had been at a few minutes earlier. The sidewalk on this side of the park was completely empty. There was no cars or people anywhere. It felt like a scene from a horror movie. As I walked, I became less concerned about whatever was in my yard, and I started to wonder if it was actually a coyote or some other animal. I made it to the corner of the park and then walked down the adjacent street. The houses on this street were similar to the ones on the street I had been walking on earlier, but they were much closer together. This made the street seem less scary than the last one, and I realized I should have just walked here initially instead. As I walked, I thought about how I was going to respond if I saw that guy with his flashlight in my yard. I didn't want to confront him because I didn't know if he was dangerous or not. At the same time, I didn't want him hiding in my yard. I figured I would ask him what he was doing and then call the cops if he gave me any weird response. Then I could ask him again what he was doing and tell him to leave my property. After walking down the street for a few minutes, I turned around to head back home. As I turned around, I realized I was only about halfway home. I didn't want to go back down that lonely first street, so I walked down the opposite side of the park. As I was walking, I heard a sound. The sound was coming from inside the park. It sounded like someone running. I quickened my pace, wanting to get away from the sound. I walked fast for about 2 minutes until I was at the entrance of the park. I stopped walking and listened. All I heard was the wind moving through the trees. I started walking home. I made it halfway down my street before I saw a police car enter the street I had originally come from. I was kind of surprised that the cop car was on my street, but I was also relieved. Maybe they were called to check out whatever was in my yard. I kept walking until I was about 100 feet away from my house. When I could see into my yard, I looked into my yard. I could see the path leading to my front door. I could see the bushes where the man was hiding, and I could see my driveway. As I was looking, I saw a pair of shoes. The shoes were black and were located in the middle of my driveway. I had parked my car in the garage, so the shoes weren't mine. They were the same shoes as the man wearing. I was really scared at this point. I honestly believed that the man was hiding in my yard, waiting for me to go into my house so he could follow me in and rob or attack me. I started to run to my front door. I didn't care how stupid I looked. I was scared and wanted to get to my door. I ran up to the door and then hit the button for the keypad. I entered the code and started opening the door. As I was opening the door, I saw the man come out from behind my bushes. He was walking slowly and seemed to be confused. He appeared to be about 6 feet tall and was wearing a dark-colored hoodie. He also had a backpack on. I couldn't see his face because it was covered in darkness. He started walking down my driveway as I opened the door. My heart was racing at this point. I opened the door and yelled at him, "What the F are you doing in my yard?" I stepped out onto my porch, but I didn't step out far. I was hoping he would leave without saying anything. He looked up at me and responded, "Sorry." He said sorry, and then turned to walk past me and leave my property. I yelled, "Get the F out of here." When he passed me, I looked at him and realized he was crying. I don't mean he had tears streaming down his face. He was wiping his eyes as if he had recently been crying. He had a sad appearance and seemed defeated. He continued walking down the sidewalk. When he got close enough, I called out to him again, "Hey, you need to get out of here." The man responded, "Sorry," and he kept walking. I shut the door and locked it. I went to the window and watched him walk away. He walked slowly and seemed to be in a daze. I didn't see him turn around or look back at me. He continued walking down the street and eventually disappeared from view. After watching him walk away, I immediately called the police and reported what had happened. When I told them about the man in my yard and that he had been crying, they responded, "Yeah, okay." They asked me if anything was stolen and I said no. I asked them if they were going to send anybody over to my neighborhood to look for him, but they said no. They did say that if I saw him again to call them back, but I knew that I would never see him again. The next day, I checked to make sure everything was okay. I walked around my property and looked for any signs of damage. I checked all the windows and doors to make sure they were locked. I also looked around my yard and saw the imprint of the man in my grass. I was still scared about what he was doing in my yard and wondered if he had done this to other people's yards. But I didn't hear from the police, so I assumed that he hadn't. I've never seen that man since, but I'm still really scared and keep checking my cameras anytime I'm gone. Am I the butthole for telling a female coworker to just leave? My husband is a truck driver. He drives locally, delivering stuff within a 100-mile radius of where he lives. The company he works for has a dispatch system that assigns loads to drivers. It also shows them where the loads are going. My husband doesn't get to pick which loads he takes. The dispatch system assigns them to him based on availability and proximity to the delivery location. I'm not a control freak. I trust my husband and have no problem with him working, but I hate the dispatch system. I do unlike that he couldn't have days off, and I hate that he could be gone for 10, 12 or more hours, and sometimes he's gone overnight. I do like that I do know if he's gone, be coming home at noon or midnight. I can't plan anything. I get that he has to work and that someone has to deliver these things, but I wish it was different. I wish it was local so he wasn't gone all the time. Now that said, I support him completely. If he wants to keep doing this job, I'll support him. It's not his fault. So I'm not looking for advice on how to talk to him about changing jobs. I just need to vent because I'm at my wit's end. Am I the butthole for calling my husband while he's at work to ask him to come help me fix something? Am I the butthole for yelling at my husband for being late coming home? Am I the butthole for refusing to let him drive my car? Am I the butthole for making him park his truck in the yard instead of the garage? Am I the butthole for demanding that he spend his day off with me? Am I the butthole for wanting him to move in with me and take care of our kids? Yeah, OP, you are the butthole for all those things. Oh, and also for starting this story with, "I'm not a control freak, that's rich." This entire post is about how controlling you are. You want everything your way. You don't want to hear about how his job is or how his day is. You want to dictate how he spends his time. But you're not a control freak, okay? Sure, op, whatever you say. Down in the comments we have this story from Throwaway984. When I worked at a grocery store at age 16, there was this one customer that came in every weekend during my shift. She was the most entitled woman I've ever encountered. She would always demand to speak to the manager, which I would happily do. Most of the time she would complain about something stupid, like how the milk was uncold enough or the bananas were unripe enough. So after politely listening to her complaints, I would always offer to replace her groceries for her or give her a rain check for the items she wanted. That was never good enough for her. No, she would always demand to speak to the owner. I told her the owner wasn't here, but she insisted that I call her, so I did. One day she called the owner on speakerphone and began listing all of her grievances for her. Of course, the owner just listened patiently and then calmly addressed each of them. Then the owner asked the woman if she was done, and the woman said yes. The owner thanked her for calling and hung up. The woman looked at me in disbelief and said, "That was your boss?" I responded, "Yes, ma'am." She screamed at me, "You didn't tell me that was the owner." "Why didn't you tell me that sooner?" I replied. "Because you wouldn't have stopped talking." She screamed at me, "Well, why didn't you interrupt me and tell me?" I stated. "You never gave me a chance to." She stormed off then. Years later, I learned that she complained to the owner about me, and I got suspended for a week without pay. I was furious. I'd already forgotten about her until last year when I saw her in the store again. She'd aged terribly and looked awful. I walked up to her and introduced myself and told her that I was the manager now, and I asked her if she had any concerns or complaints. She looked at me and said, "No, I'm good. You're not that annoying little girl anymore." I smiled and said, "Good, because I remember you and I didn't have a good history." I've always loved that story. The lady literally calls the store owner herself and lays out all of her grievances and then complains that the owner didn't listen to her. How is that possible? Like, how can you say the owner didn't listen when she spent the previous 10 minutes talking at her? And then when the owner gets on the phone, she listens to all of them. But somehow that still isn't enough. Like, what more does she want? I love the fact that the owner didn't engage with her. They just listened to her and then addressed each concern. And I love the comeback that the OP had for her years later. No, I'm good. You're not that annoying little girl anymore. Brilliant. And our final story comes from Chauncey. A few weeks ago, I drove through a small town and forgot to put my blinker on when changing lanes. A cop was behind me and pulled me over. I was completely in the wrong. As I pulled over, I saw that it was a female officer and I figured that I could negotiate my way out of the ticket. As I approached her, I said, "Hi, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut that guy off." She ignored me and opened my door and started writing me a ticket. I lied and said, "Ma'am, I'm a state trooper." She stopped writing and said, "Sir, you're not a state trooper." I replied, "Well, I am." She raised her eyebrows and said, "Oh yeah, well, that explains a lot. Have you ever heard of a thing called the Brady handwritten rule?" I was stumped. I hadn't, and I couldn't think of a lie on the spot, so I just replied, "No, Mom." She then explained the rule to me. Essentially, any law enforcement officer must write out the details of any written warning or citation by hand. In most states, this is done on a paper ticket. If a cop gives you a verbal warning, they don't have to do this. It's meant to discourage cops from giving out tickets to certain people, especially politicians, celebrities, and, of course, other cops. She told me that I could probably find myself in some deep shit if I was lying to her and she found out. Then she wrote me a ticket. She actually offered to drop the fine if I paid her $500 cash. I was happy to accept her offer and I paid her and I went on my way. When the ticket showed up in the mail, I decided to fight it. I told the judge about the incident and he ended up dismissing the case. Apparently, accepting a bribe is a huge thing in law enforcement. Who would have thought? Down in the comments we have this from Justin Deontasts. It's not illegal to accept a bribe in Texas. That's a civil matter between you and the cop. However, in addition to possibly losing your license, you can sue the cop for the return of your money. Yeah, Op, you're kind of screwed. Good job, Op. That was just no mail. And if you like this content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. Also hit that subscribe button because I put out new videos every single day.